Dear viewers, this is the part 2 and final part of how a Texas female nurse fulfilled a prisoner's last wish. In part 1, we saw Sandra, a young nurse, meet Daniel, a man trapped in prison after being framed by a powerful company. Instead of giving up, Daniel trusted Sandra with a secret that could change everything. Now in this final part, we continue their emotional journey of truth, courage, and compassion. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, please click on the link in the description and the pinned comment to watch it first, so you don't miss a single piece of this powerful story. And while you're here, don't forget to drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. Sandra sat alone in her small apartment after her shift, her hands trembling as she replayed Daniel's words. He had told her about hidden files evidence that proved the company framed him. His voice still echoed in her ears. "You're the only one I can trust." She wanted to dismiss it, to tell herself she was just a nurse and it wasn't her fight. But her heart wouldn't let her rest. Daniel's eyes had carried more truth than any lawyer or judge she had seen in that courtroom years ago. Sandra took a deep breath, her mind torn between fear and courage. If she helped him, she could lose her job, her license, even her freedom. But if she walked away, an innocent man would die carrying a lie written by greedy men. The night stretched long and heavy. At dawn, she made her decision. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She grabbed her car keys, prayed silently for strength, and drove to the old storage building Daniel had described. The building was dusty and forgotten, with cobwebs hanging in the corners. Her heart pounded as she used the small key Daniel had hidden years ago in a crack behind a loose brick. Inside, she found a box filled with documents, letters, water reports, and secret memos. The papers revealed how the company leaders had approved dumping dangerous chemicals into the water. Worse, they showed how they planned to blame Daniel for refusing to take part. Sandra's hands shook as she flipped through page after page. This was it. This was the truth Daniel had been carrying all along, but the danger was real. If the company discovered she had this box, they would come after her too. She wrapped the documents carefully, locked them in her bag, and drove home with tears in her eyes. The next morning at the prison, Sandra walked to Daniel's cell. He was sitting on his bunk, staring at the floor. When he saw her, his eyes searched her face. "Did you?" he whispered, his voice tight with hope and fear. Sandra nodded gently. "I found it, Daniel. Everything you said, it's all there." For a moment, Daniel closed his eyes and pressed his hand against the cold bars, as if a weight had finally lifted from his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. "Even if nothing changes, thank you for believing me." Sandra shook her head firmly. "No, Daniel, we're not stopping here. I'm going to take this to court. I don't care what it costs me. The truth has to come out." Daniel's lips trembled as he looked at her. "Sandra, no one has ever risked anything for me. Not my lawyers, not my so-called friends. Only you." Sandra blinked back tears. "Because you deserve a chance at life, Daniel. And I won't let them take it without a fight." That night, Sandra typed up a report, attaching copies of every document. She sent them to a lawyer she trusted, one who had fought powerful companies before. The lawyer responded quickly, shocked by the evidence, and agreed to file a lawsuit against the water company and appeal Daniel's case. News spread slowly, then faster. Journalists began digging into the company's past. Community members started asking questions. Whispers of corruption turned into loud voices demanding justice. Inside his cell, Daniel waited in silence, but every time Sandra visited, she brought him updates. Each time, his hope grew. "Do you think they'll listen this time?" he asked one evening, his voice almost breaking. "They have to," Sandra replied firmly. "Because this time, the truth is louder than their lies." Weeks turned into months, and the fight was not easy. The company sent threats. Lawyers tried to bury the case, and Sandra faced pressure at work. But she never backed down. She carried Daniel's truth like a shield. Finally, the day came when the court reopened Daniel's case. Sandra sat in the courtroom, clutching the box of documents, while Daniel was brought in wearing his orange jumpsuit. The room was tense, every eye fixed on him. The judge listened as the evidence was presented: memos signed by executives, water tests showing poison levels, and letters Daniel had written years ago warning about the danger. Piece by piece, the lies fell apart. By the end of the hearing, silence filled the room. The judge's voice was steady but heavy with meaning. "This court finds that Daniel was wrongfully convicted. His sentence is overturned, and he is hereby released." Gasps echoed. Sandra covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel stood frozen, as if afraid to believe it was real. Then he looked at Sandra, his eyes filled with gratitude, pain, and freedom all at once. As guards removed his chains, Sandra whispered to herself, "We did it." For Daniel, it wasn't just freedom. It was the truth finally shining through years of darkness. Daniel walked out of the courthouse that day as a free man, but the world outside felt strange. The sun was brighter than he remembered, the air fresher, yet his steps were heavy. Years in prison had taken away not just his freedom, but pieces of his soul. Sandra walked beside him, steadying him when his knees almost buckled. He stopped on the courthouse steps and looked at the crowd gathered outside. Reporters held microphones, cameras flashed, and strangers cheered. But Daniel's eyes searched for only one face. And there she was, Margaret, the woman he once dreamed of marrying. She stood a few feet away, her hands trembling, tears flowing freely. For years, she had carried the shame of being tied to a man the world called a criminal. Now, the truth had set him free, and her heart couldn't hold back any longer. Daniel froze, unable to move. "Do you think she still loves me?" he whispered to Sandra, his voice breaking. Sandra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go find out." Slowly, Daniel walked toward Margaret. Each step felt like walking through fire. When he finally reached her, words failed him. Margaret didn't wait. She threw her arms around him and sobbed into his chest. "I knew it," she cried. "I knew you couldn't have done it. I prayed every night that the truth would come out." Daniel held her tightly, his own tears soaking her hair. "I'm so sorry for the years you lost because of me. I'm sorry for the nights you cried alone." Margaret pulled back slightly and shook her head. "Don't apologize, Daniel. You were the one suffering inside those walls. The only thing that matters now is that you're free and the world finally knows the truth." Sandra stood a few steps away, her heart swelling with relief. This was why she had risked everything for this very moment. But even as joy filled the air, shadows still lingered. The water company had not disappeared. They still had power, money, and influence. Exposing them meant Sandra and Daniel were now targets. That evening, Sandra received a call from her lawyer. "Be careful," he warned. "The company will fight back. They've already sent threats. They won't forgive you for bringing the truth to light." Sandra's stomach twisted with fear, but she refused to let it shake her. She looked at Daniel, who was sitting quietly on the couch in her small apartment, staring at the world outside the window. "They ruined your life once," Sandra said firmly. "I won't let them ruin it again." Daniel turned to her, his voice soft but determined. "We've come too far to stop now. If they want to fight, then let them. The people deserve to know the truth." In the days that followed, Sandra and Daniel worked closely with journalists. The evidence spread across television screens and newspapers. Families came forward, sharing stories of sickness linked to the poisoned water. Protests began outside the company headquarters. The pressure grew so strong that the government launched a full investigation. Executives who once walked confidently now hid behind closed doors, fearing arrest. One night, as Sandra walked to her car after work, a dark vehicle pulled up beside her. A man leaned out the window and hissed, "You should have kept quiet. This isn't over." Then the car sped away. Her hands trembled as she drove home, but when she saw Daniel and Margaret waiting for her with dinner on the table, her fear melted into courage. She realized she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Daniel squeezed her hand across the table. "You saved my life, Sandra. But this fight, it's bigger than me. It's about every family that drank that poisoned water. We can't stop until justice is complete." Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. "You're right. This isn't just about proving you innocent anymore. It's about saving lives." Months later, the trial against the company began. Sandra was called to testify. Standing in front of the court, she spoke with steady conviction. She explained how Daniel had trusted her, how she uncovered the hidden documents, and how the truth had finally been revealed. The courtroom was silent as she finished her testimony. Then Daniel took the stand. His voice shook at first, but as he spoke of the years stolen from him, of the pain of being called a monster when all he did was refuse to poison innocent people, the entire room listened with heavy hearts. When the verdict came, it was clear. The company was guilty. Top executives were sentenced, fines were imposed, and new laws were passed to protect communities from corporate greed. Outside the courthouse, Daniel stood with Margaret's hand in his and Sandra by his side. Cameras flashed, but this time, the world wasn't capturing the image of a broken prisoner. It was capturing the image of a man who had overcome lies and a nurse who had risked everything to save him. Daniel turned to Sandra, his voice filled with gratitude. "You gave me my life back. I can never repay you." Sandra smiled softly. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel. Just live free. That's enough for me." For the first time in years, Daniel smiled without pain. Margaret hugged Sandra tightly, whispering, "You're part of our family now. We'll never forget what you did." As the sun set that evening, Sandra stood quietly, watching them. She thought about how one choice to believe in Daniel had changed everything. She realized that true healing doesn't come from punishment or revenge. It comes from truth, courage, and compassion strong enough to stand against fear. And though the scars of the past would never fully disappear, Daniel walked into the future with his head high, Margaret by his side, and Sandra forever etched in his story as the nurse who chose to fight when everyone else turned away. The storm had passed, but the air was still heavy with memories. Daniel was free. The company had been punished, yet the years stolen from him could never return. Some nights he would wake in a sweat, still hearing the clang of prison doors. Other nights he sat quietly, staring at the stars, wondering how his life might have been if the truth had come sooner. Sandra often joined him during those silent evenings. She never asked questions, she only sat nearby, letting her presence remind him that he was not alone. One evening, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you ever regret it, Sandra? Risking everything for me?" His voice was soft, almost fearful. Sandra looked at him firmly. "No, Daniel, not for a second. Because if I had stayed silent, I would have carried the guilt of letting an innocent man die. I would have lost myself." Daniel lowered his head, his eyes glistening. "Then maybe we both saved each other." Life outside prison was not simple for Daniel. He had to rebuild everything from nothing. He struggled to find work because people still whispered about his past. Some neighbors avoided him, still believing lies they had heard for years. But Margaret never left his side. She worked long hours, and at night she reminded him of who he truly was not, what the world once called him. Sandra helped too. She connected Daniel with a community group that supported wrongfully convicted prisoners. At first, Daniel was nervous to attend, but when he heard other men and women share their stories, his heart began to heal. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the only one who had carried injustice in silence. One day, Sandra received a letter in the mail. It was from the governor's office. She read it twice before showing it to Daniel. His hands shook as he opened it. The letter officially cleared his name not just from the court, but in the public record. His conviction was erased, and he was recognized as a man who had stood against corruption. Daniel sank into a chair, clutching the letter to his chest. "It's finally over," he whispered. Tears streamed down his face. Margaret knelt beside him, holding his hand, while Sandra placed her hand gently on his shoulder. But Daniel didn't stop there. He decided to use his voice to protect others. He began speaking at schools, churches, and community centers about the dangers of greed, the importance of truth, and the need for courage. Each time he spoke, his words carried pain but also hope. Sandra often sat in the crowd, listening. Every time she watched him stand tall and speak with conviction, her heart swelled. She knew this was the Daniel the world was meant to see, not a prisoner, not a victim, but a fighter. Months later, a community event was held in Daniel's honor. Families who had once doubted him now came to thank him. Mothers brought children who had fallen sick from the poisoned water, telling him, "Because of you, my child has a chance at life." Fathers shook his hand, saying, "You gave us courage to demand clean water." As Daniel stood at the podium, Margaret by his side, and Sandra in the front row, he paused before speaking. His eyes met Sandra's, and for a moment, words failed. Then he said, "This story is not about me alone. It's about every person who chose truth over fear." Sandra believed me when no one else did. She risked her career, her life, and her peace for a man the world had already condemned. Without her, I wouldn't be here. And without Margaret, I would have lost my heart. Together, they gave me back my life. The crowd erupted in applause. Sandra felt her cheeks flush, tears filling her eyes. She had never sought recognition. She only wanted the truth to win. But hearing Daniel's words, she realized that courage doesn't go unseen, it inspires others. That night, after the event, Sandra walked home under the quiet Texas sky. She thought about all she had seen, the lies, the fear, the threats, but also the love, the forgiveness, and the strength. She realized something deep. True healing never comes from power or wealth. It comes from people willing to stand beside each other in the darkest hours. When she reached her door, she found Margaret waiting with a smile. "Daniel wanted me to give you this," she said, handing Sandra a folded note. Sandra opened it. Daniel's handwriting filled the page. "Sandra, they called you my nurse, but you became more than that. You became my voice when I had none, my hope when I was broken, my sister when I had no family. I can never repay you, but I will spend the rest of my life living in a way that honors the chance you gave me." If the world forgets my name, it doesn't matter as long as they remember yours. Because you prove that compassion can be stronger than fear, and truth can be stronger than lies." Sandra pressed the note to her chest, her tears falling freely. For the first time in a long while, her heart felt light. She whispered into the night, "This was worth everything." From that day on, Sandra continued her work as a nurse, but she was no longer just a nurse. She had become a symbol of courage in her community. People looked at her not as someone who followed rules, but as someone who stood for justice when it mattered most. Daniel, Margaret, and Sandra remained close, bound by a story that would never fade. They often met for dinner, laughter slowly replacing the years of sorrow. And whenever Sandra looked at Daniel smiling with freedom in his eyes, she knew this was not just the end of his story, it was the beginning of a new one. Dear viewers, this brings us to the end of the final part of how a Texas female nurse fulfilled a prisoner's last wish. What we just witnessed is more than a story, it's a reminder that truth, courage, and compassion can still shine in the darkest places. If this story touched your heart, please don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button, share it with your friends and family, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss another powerful story like this. And before you go, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Also, comment more stories if you'd like us to keep bringing you more emotional and unforgettable stories. Thank you for watching, dear viewers. Until next time, remember, truth may be buried for a while, but it can never be destroyed.